Hi there, I'm Elizabeth with Ellie's Handcrafted Jewelry, and welcome back to my channel where I share tips, tricks, and tutorials for those looking to learn the art of wire wrapping and wire weaving. And today I'm going to be showing you how to create this woven pumpkin pendant. Fall is just around the corner, so I figured I'd go ahead and launch into September with a really cute pumpkin, because who doesn't love pumpkins? In this particular tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to create the woven frame, how to create all the swirly elements, and this is also a tutorial using square wire rather than round. I've had several requests using square wire, but you can use round wire also. So if you don't have square wire, don't fret, you can use round wire just as well. That's not the only new tutorial today. There is a new written tutorial available as well. It's the Elvira coffin pendant. So just kind of getting into spooky season. So you can play with both coffin shapes and ovals to create your pumpkins and your coffins. But before we jump into the video, let's hear from our sponsor, Cabochons.
Before we get started, I'd like to thank Cabochons for sponsoring this video. Cabochons is a gem seller located in the United States and has a variety of high-quality stones. Search by gemstone, shape, size, quality, and more to find the perfect stone for your project. I've left a link in the description below to their website as well as their Facebook page so that you can stay up to date on any new arrivals or sales. Alright, so for tools and materials, you're going to need 20 gauge square wire. I have this cut into 6 11-inch segments, or about 28 centimeters. You're also going to need some 28 gauge weaving wire, probably at least 3 or 4 meters, or about 10 feet. You're also going to need an oval cabochon. This one happens to be about 35 millimeters by 22 millimeters. For tools, you're going to need chain nose pliers. You're also going to need round nose pliers, flush cutters, a ruler, and a Sharpie. Now to get started, I'm going to take my segments of wire here, lay it on the ruler, and then I'm going to mark the halfway spot, so it's about 5.5 inches or about 14 centimeters. Mark it right on the center. And then I'm going to mark about 1/4 inch on either side. And then I'll stick that into my clamp and we'll start weaving. Now it's not necessary to have a clamp, but when you're working with as many wires as we are, I do recommend having one. You can actually use this as a spring clamp, or you can use what's called a ring clamp. And I've left links in the description where you can find those, but this is just going to make my job a little easier. Now, grab some of my weaving wire, and I'm going to separate these wires a little bit, making sure that they are straight, or at least next to each other. Okay, so now these are loaded up in the clamp. I'm going to make sure that there's a long tail piece here. So I'm going to pull out about 5 feet of wire-ish. Probably more like 4, just so I have a really long tail. You don't have to do that, but I recommend doing it. It'll just make your weaving more consistent. And I'm going to wrap this tail piece around this base wire, so the 3rd base wire from the top, and I'm going to wrap it around there 3 times if I don't pull my wires out. I'm going to bring that in between the next wire next to it and wrap around once. And then pull it apart just a little bit. Bring that in between from the back, in between the bottom 2 base wires, and then around the next 2 base wires. Scoot my wire down as I go. And then again, wrapping around one time around the bottom 2 base wires. From here, I'm going to bring the wire back in between those wires. And then down and around the same 2 base wires we were just weaving. In between those 2 base wires. Then around the next 2 base wires, going back up set of wires. And then I'm going to wrap around that same base wire 3 times again. And this is, I believe it's called a flame weave. So I'm wrapping around 3 times. That. From there, I'm going to scoot this wire over using my flat nose pliers. You can also use your chain nose pliers, just be very gentle. From there, rather than going back up to create this weave, we got to secure these 2 wires here at the top. I'm going to straighten my wire out a little bit. And then from underneath, I'm going the opposite direction and around those wires. So 1 time. Do it 1 more time. So there's 2 times. And now we're going to start this flame weave over again, but wrapping around this the third base wire 3 times. And then around descending, wrapping around each 2, and from the back, wrapping around second and third base wires from the bottom, then around the bottom 2 base wires again. Bringing in between those to ascend back up the base wires. So, and then wrapping around 3 times around that starting wire. And I'm going to scoot my wire over using my flat nose pliers, just gently and then compressing. And again, I'm going to wrap around those 2 base wires. This is going to be the last time that I do that. So wrapping around them once. Oops. And then twice. And then coming back up from underneath and wrapping around that base wire 3 times again, and then repeating the flame weave. You can see that my marks are off a little bit. I started a little bit too far over. It should have been started about there. So I'll probably just scoot them over here in a minute. Bring around the next 2 base wires. And around the next 2. Then in between those 2 wires and then ascending again. And then around that 1 base wire 3 times. There we go. So now we have secured all the wires together. We're going to continue this flame weave up until we reach half the circumference. So if you want to, you can take some blue masking tape and wrap it around your stone and then mark where the ends meet, and that will give you the total distance that you need around the stone. You can also just weave and then place it on there, and you can curve it around. I know that I need about 1.75 inches of weaving for this particular stone. So I'm just going to continue the flame weave on just this side until I reach that, and then I'll meet you back here. Okay, so here you can see I've woven about 1.75 inches, and I'm going to do the same on the opposite side. So that way I can create the woven frame for the pumpkin pendant. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that. I'm going to pull these aside a little bit. I'm going to continue the flame weave on the other side. We're not going to weave these 2 wires because we've already got them secured. So just straightening out my wires a little bit. I'm going to wrap my wires. I'm going to move these a little bit out of the way before I do that. Wrap around the bottom 2 wires here. Then bring the wire in between those. Oops, wrong wire. I'm going to bring those wires in between those 2 wires that I just wove together. Now I'm going to wrap it around the 2 center wires. Then bring the weaving wire in between those 2 wires. And up and over the top 2 wires. Then back down around in between the bottom 2 wires on the back. Then around the center 2 wires. Then around the bottom 2 wires one time. I'm going to wrap that last base wire 3 times. And I'm just going to go ahead and continue that weave until I match the opposite side. Just making sure you scoot and compress your wire as you go so that they are even and consistent. And we'll just continue weaving just like we did on the opposite side. Okay, so you can see I have woven the frame now. We have these 2 center pieces. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start curving them up using my cabochon as a guide. So I'll set that there. And just going to start curving up gently, using my thumbs to kind of hold it flat. And you can notice too, I haven't cut my weaving wire yet because if I need to weave a little bit more, I can. So it might be a little bit in the way, but pull these up as well. And get them out of the way. Just curving my wire upward. And if you need to, you can use your pliers to kind of flatten this back out. And just take your time with this. So at this point, what I'm going to do, looks like my weave is long enough, so I'm going to go ahead and pull off this excess wire. So I'm going to pull and twist. I'm going to do the same with the other wire. That off. And actually, I probably shouldn't have pulled that one off, so don't pull off any more wire. But that's okay. Since I did, I'll show you what I'm going to do to fix it. But before I do that, I need to pull these. So I'm going to pull that up and pull that upward. So as this comes more together, these will meet. Also trying to keep this at the center. So now this is about where I want it. So we have it kind of nicely wrapped around. It should just sit in there. Now I'm going to grab my weaving wire that I cut off too soon. I'm going to pull these forward just a little bit out of the way. And I'm going to separate some wires here. So I'm going to separate these 2 wires. I'm going to separate the other 2 wires to that side. And we're going to weave together these wires. And the way I'm going to do that, grab my weaving wire. I'm going to wrap it around this wire here. If I can give myself enough of a tail to grab onto. So I'm going to grab it and I'm going to wrap it around this outer wire 3 times to start the weave. Scoot that down just a tad. Use my pliers to help me a little bit so I don't destroy my fingernails totally. From there, I'm going to wrap it around the next 2 base wires. I'm opening these up a little bit so I can weave a little easier. So around these 2 base wires, and then in between, then around that base wire, those 2 base wires, and then in between those, gently. Oops. Then around the next 2. That's a little bit too much of a gap still. And around and in between those, and then around 1 time on the outside. So we're basically going to do a modified sumac weave. And I'm just going to continue doing that. So going back around, starting off on this end again, and around the 2 wires, in between those 2 wires, then around the next 2 wires, then in between those 2 wires, then around the next 2 wires, and then finally in between and around that outer wire. And you can grab your pliers, gently compress the weave and scoot it down. It'll be a little difficult at the beginning here. It'll get easier as you weave more. I'll show you one more time. So wrapping around that bottom base wire 1 time, then around the next 2 1 time, bringing the wire in between those 2 wires, then around the next 2 base wires, back in between those wires, then around the final 2, in between, and around it once. Compress the weave, and scoot it down. And we're just going to do that for about 1 inch or so of weaving. Now here you can see I've woven about 1 inch of my modified sumac weave. I'm going to pull off this tail piece, doing a little pull and twist. And then I'm going to take this weaving wire and I'm going to wrap it around this outer base wire 3 times to secure the weave. And then I'll take off the excess weaving wire once I finish that. So now that I've finished that, it's time to create our little dimension for the pumpkin. And I'm just going to curve these wires, these bare base wires here in the front, just very gently. And just take your time with this, doesn't need to be rushed. Just making sure that they cross over in front of the center of the pendant, moving these wires out of the way. And then I'm going to wrap these over the top of the frame towards the back. Just making sure I get them in the spot that I want them first. So now just bending them towards the back, kind of help hold them in their spot for a minute. And then I'll grab my flush cutters and trim them off and then tuck them back into the back of the frame. So now I'm just going to use my flat nose pliers here. You can also use your chain nose pliers and just tuck those into the back of the frame. At this point, you can go ahead and adjust as needed and get those wires just where you want them. Now once that's where I want it, I'm going to grab my stone and stick it in there and make sure that it doesn't fall out and it fits in there nicely. Continue adjusting where I want everything. And now it's time to start creating the back. So I'm going to bend this bail backwards, like so. I'm going to grab my flat nose pliers, bend this back outward just slightly, then grab it with my pliers and then bend it in slowly. You can adjust it if you need to, just be really careful not to sever the weaves. Pulling these apart and pulling them upward. Just like that. Now you can see what I'm going to do. I'm basically going to create swirls on the ends of these. So to do that, I'm going to grab my flush cutters and trim these off just outside the frame. Just outside the frame like that, and then trim and trim. Then I'm going to grab my round nose pliers and create little swirls on the end of each of these. And don't worry about having a super tight swirl. You can tighten them once they're secured to the frame. For now, we just kind of want to get an idea of where they're going to be sitting. And we're just going to do this to all of the swirls. Now I'm going to stick my stone in here. And then I'm going to start securing these swirls to the frame. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to grab some weaving wire, wrap it around the frame and the swirl. I'll grab some excess weaving wire that I have laying over here on the side. And I'm going to wrap around the swirl first. So I'm going to wrap around it 3 times. Pulling it through, holding it down with my thumb so it doesn't go anywhere. Bring it around again. And one more time. And if you have troubles reaching it, you can grab your pliers as well if you need any help with that. And once I've wrapped it around the swirl, I'm going to feed it through the outside of the frame and underneath the swirl to secure the swirl to the frame. So I'm just going to lift up the swirl gently in the hopes of getting it through them. Feeding it through and back through. And then I'm just going to wrap around the swirl 3 more times, and that will secure the swirl. Now you can wrap that around the outside frame a couple times if you want to be extra secure, but once should be sufficient. Now I got it right where I want it. Do a little pull and twist to pull off the excess weaving wire. You can also use your flush cutters. Now at this point, I'm going to grab my round nose pliers and tighten that swirl a little bit, and then I'll make it a little extra secure for my stone. And now I'm just going to repeat that on all of the remaining swirls. Now once I finish the back here, I've secured all of the swirls. Now it's on to the fun part of doing the swirly bits. So I'm going to take these 2 here on the side, separate them, and I'll separate the others on the other side as well. And I'm going to grab this outermost swirl, move it out of the way a little bit, and take this one, curve it downward. I'm going to begin curving it upward towards the center of the bail. And I'm going to create a swirl here at the center. So I'm just going to wrap this around a little bit more, creating almost like a loop. And I'll grab my flush cutters and trim that off. Just like that. Now I'm going to grab my round nose pliers and create a swirl there, right there at the center. And if you want a little bit of a tighter swirl, here's a little trick for you. You can actually use I have flat nose pliers, but you can use chain nose pliers, and just gently compress the little swirl inside, and that'll help tighten up your swirl a little bit. Just like that. I'm going to bring this other one down next to it, almost like I'm going to follow it, but I'm actually going to create a little loop going towards the inside of the frame. I don't really like the shape of that. I need to fix it with my pliers. Kind of curving over the top of that, and then curving this back outward to create a swirl. Now I'm going to snip that off here and curve this inward. So now I'm just going to grab my pliers and turn them in. A little swirl. Now once I've done that, it's time to do the other side. I'm going to grab this wire here, turn it, and I'm basically going to do the same thing like I did on this side. Create a loop that faces inward. And I'm going to curve this back outward and create a swirl on this side as well. Grabbing my flush cutters, turning that off. I'm just going to turn that up into a swirl. Now I'm just going to grab this remaining wire. I'm going to curve this downward. So almost like I'm going to follow up, but I'm going to actually turn this down. So that way it'll mirror the top swirl. Creating my little loop. And I'm going to grab my flush cutters, trim that off. Grab my round nose pliers and begin to create my swirl. Just like that. Now if you have a little bit of a straight piece in there, you can actually grab your flush cutters and trim that off. And that'll kind of help with this swirl and make it a little bit more swirled rather than having any straight pieces in there. I'm just going to grab my round nose pliers and continue swirling my wire. I'm just fixing up any other swirls I think need fixing. And there's all the swirly bits, and now we just need to start attaching them to the frame. Now these outer swirls I'm going to secure just like I did the back swirls, but I'm going to show you how I'm going to secure the center swirls at the center of the pendant. So grabbing some excess weaving wire here. So those are going to be secured just like that, but these I'm going to secure a little bit differently because they're at the center of the piece. So I'm going to start by wrapping my weaving wire around the top swirl 3 times. I have to orient a little bit, figuring out where I am. So once, twice. Now the third time, I'm going to string this through, so right underneath the next swirl. get it under there. Feed that through, making sure it goes under the previous swirl. Bringing that right next to each other. I'm going to bring this up and over, and I'm going to try to actually get it underneath these bare wires here on the front of the pendant as well, to kind of secure it to the front of the stone. See here? It's right underneath these wires. Feed it through. Make sure it at least captures one of those wires. Bring it up. And then wrap it back around those swirls. I'm going to press these first. And now I'm just going to wrap it around this top swirl again 3 times. So I've wrapped it around both swirls. Now wrapping it around the top swirl 3 times to finish the weave. And just do a little pull and twist. Pull off the excess wire. Do the same with the tail piece. Press that a little bit with my pliers, make it a little neater. And now those wires are secured to the front of the frame and they're not going anywhere. And then these two just secure to the frame just like you did the back swirls. And here's the finished pumpkin. Now you can weave in beads too if you want to kind of add some more elements to it, but here are all the swirly accents and on the back. And here's what it would look like if you oxidized it. Very pretty. If you're looking for a video on how to do that, I am going to tag that in this video for you so you can find it. But here are the finished pumpkins. But before you go, here's a little sneak peek of the Elvira pendant. As you can see, it features a lot of swirls also, as well as a faceted stone set in the swirls.
And I hope that you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions at all, go ahead and leave them in the comment section below as I try to get to them as quickly as I can. Just a reminder about the new written tutorial, the Elvira coffin pendant is now available. If you have a vault subscription, you already have access to that. If you want to know more about the artisan tutorial vault, I have left a link in the description below to where you can check out that. And if you're interested in the beginner course, I still have that available on my website as well. All of the links have been left in the description below. If you'd like to share your work with others and get to know other artisans like yourself, there also is a Facebook group available to you if you'd like to check that out. And until next time, happy weaving.